Michael had worked at Hamilton Enterprises for years, and everyone in the office saw him as an ordinary man with an ordinary job. He dressed simply, spoke politely, and never tried to stand out. To most people, he was just another face in the busy halls of the company. Yet Michael carried something inside him that no one around him knew. On a quiet Monday morning, the office buzzed with its usual noise. Phones rang, keyboards clicked, and the smell of coffee floated in the air. Michael was at his desk, finishing a report, when his manager, Robert, stormed in with a stern face. The entire department looked up. "Michael," Robert said loudly, "come with me to the conference room. Now." The sudden command made Michael's heart tighten. Still, he nodded and followed Robert. Employees whispered as they watched. Michael kept his eyes forward, not wanting to meet their stares. Inside the conference room, two other senior managers were waiting: James and Olivia. Papers were spread across the table, and in the center lay a small black envelope. Michael recognized it immediately. It was from the company's safe. "Michael," Robert began, his voice sharp, "you've been accused of stealing company money. Do you have anything to say before we make this official?" Michael's lips parted, but for a moment, he said nothing. His hands rested calmly at his sides, even though a storm of emotions rose inside him. He looked at the envelope, then at the three faces staring back at him. "I didn't take anything," he said softly. Robert slammed his hand on the table. "The proof is right here. The money went missing last week, and yesterday we found this envelope in your desk drawer." Michael blinked slowly. He remembered clearly he had never touched the safe, and he had never seen that envelope before. Someone had planted it. But instead of defending himself further, he stayed quiet. James crossed his arms. "This is very serious, Michael. Theft in this company cannot be forgiven. We have no choice but to let you go." Michael's chest ached at those words, not because of the job he was about to lose, but because of the injustice pressing down on him. He looked at Olivia, the only one who sometimes showed kindness. For a moment, he thought she might speak up, but she lowered her eyes instead. The meeting ended quickly. Robert walked Michael out of the room, but not quietly. He raised his voice so the entire office could hear. "Michael has been fired for stealing from the company," Robert announced. "Let this be a lesson to everyone: dishonesty will not be tolerated here." The office went silent. Dozens of eyes turned to Michael as he stood frozen in the center of the floor. Some faces looked shocked, others disappointed, and a few even satisfied. Whispers began to spread like fire. "Michael? I can't believe it. He always seemed so quiet, maybe too quiet. I knew something was off about him." Michael listened but didn't answer. Each word cut deep, but he forced himself to remain calm. His hands stayed steady, and his expression revealed nothing. Slowly, he picked up the small box of his belongings from his desk, just a few photos, some books, and a mug, and began walking toward the door. As he walked, his eyes scanned the room. He saw Emma, a young colleague who once called him a friend. She looked away when their eyes met. That hurt more than Robert's loud accusation. When he reached the exit, Michael paused for a moment. The world outside the glass doors shone with bright sunlight, almost mocking the darkness inside him. He turned his head slightly, giving one last look at the people who now saw him as a thief. His calm voice carried across the silence. "Sometimes," he said, "the truth hides longer than lies. But it never disappears." With that, he walked out. The moment he left, the office erupted in chatter. Some said he was guilty, others wondered if there was more to the story. Robert, however, smiled to himself, certain that he had destroyed Michael's place in the company forever. But what Robert and the others didn't know was this: Michael had never truly been just an employee. The company they all worked for, Hamilton Enterprises, had been built with his vision, his ideas, and his sacrifices. Years ago, he had stepped back, hiding his name from the records for reasons no one could guess. As he walked down the street that day, carrying nothing but a small box, Michael felt the weight of humiliation pressing down on him. Yet, beneath that weight, there was also a quiet strength. He knew something no one else in that office knew. They thought they had fired him. They thought they had ruined him. But in truth, they had only awakened the owner. Long before Michael was humiliated in front of the entire office, his life had been very different. Years ago, he was not just another face in a crowded workplace, he was a dreamer with fire in his heart. He believed in building something that would outlast him, something that would give opportunities to others who had once been ignored like him. Michael had grown up in a small town. His father worked long shifts at a factory, while his mother managed the home with quiet strength. Money was always tight, but his parents never let him forget the value of honesty, hard work, and hope. As a boy, Michael often sat at the kitchen table late at night, sketching ideas for businesses he imagined one day owning. His mother would place a gentle hand on his shoulder and whisper, "One day, you'll make something great, Michael. Just never lose your kindness." When he was old enough, Michael left for the city. Life there was not easy. He took small jobs, sometimes washing dishes, sometimes carrying boxes, anything to pay rent and save a little money. Yet, even while struggling, his mind was always busy. He kept notebooks filled with plans, designs for new projects, ideas for offices, and goals for how to treat employees fairly. It was during this time that he met James, a skilled accountant who believed in Michael's vision. James saw how dedicated he was, how carefully he thought through every step, and how deeply he cared about people. "Michael," James once told him, "you're not like the others. You don't just want profit, you want purpose. That's rare." Together, Michael and James worked day and night, slowly building what would one day become Hamilton Enterprises. At first, it was just a small team operating from a tiny rented office. They had no luxury, only determination. Emma, a young graduate at the time, joined them too, bringing fresh ideas. Back then, she admired Michael for his patience and encouragement. Those were golden days. Every desk in that small room carried the sound of ambition. Michael often brought sandwiches for everyone when money was too little to buy proper meals. He never complained, instead, he inspired. "We're not building a company," he would say. "We're building a family." Years passed, and slowly Hamilton Enterprises grew. One contract turned into many, one client recommended another, and soon the company had a strong reputation. By the time they moved into a tall glass building downtown, Hamilton Enterprises was no longer just a dream, it was a success story. But success came with shadows. Investors began to take interest, and with them came complicated rules, pressure, and politics. Michael, who had once spent his days encouraging his small team, now found himself sitting in endless meetings where numbers mattered more than people. He saw how some of the new managers looked down on employees, treating them like machines rather than human beings. One investor in particular, Robert, was sharp, ambitious, and cold. He believed power came from fear, not respect. He didn't understand Michael's gentle way of leadership. At first, Michael tried to guide him, but soon he realized Robert had his own vision, one that clashed with everything Michael stood for. It was during this stormy period that Michael made a life-changing decision. He decided to step back from the visible role of leadership. He transferred his official title and allowed others to believe he was just another employee, hidden among the staff. On paper, Robert and a few others appeared to hold more power. In reality, Michael quietly kept majority ownership, hidden behind legal walls that only James truly understood. Why would he do such a thing? Many asked him, but Michael never gave a clear answer. The truth was simple: he wanted to see what kind of company Hamilton Enterprises would become when people thought he was not watching. He wanted to walk among the workers, to feel their struggles, to understand their hearts. He didn't want the respect that came with the title, he wanted the truth that came when people thought he was ordinary. For years, Michael worked quietly in the shadows of his own creation. He sat at a desk like everyone else, typed reports, attended meetings, and ate lunch in the cafeteria. Many forgot his past contributions, believing he was just another worker. That never bothered him. What hurt him most was watching people like Robert twist the culture of the company into something he had never wanted. Still, Michael kept silent. He believed that one day, the truth would matter more than the lies. When he was fired in front of everyone, accused of theft he never committed, the memory of his journey returned to him like a flood. From the nights in his small apartment to the first contracts signed with trembling hands, to the laughter of the early team eating simple sandwiches, he remembered it all. He remembered why he had built Hamilton Enterprises in the first place. As he walked away from the office that day with his box of belongings, Michael's heart was heavy with pain. But beneath the pain was also something stronger: resolve. The company might have forgotten him, but the foundation it stood on was his blood, his sweat, and his sacrifice. Robert thought he had ended Michael's story. The truth was, Robert had only written the beginning of a much greater chapter. Robert sat in his office with the blinds half closed, the city lights glowing faintly through the glass. On his desk lay documents that most employees would never see, proof of his dealings, secrets carefully hidden under layers of numbers and contracts. He leaned back in his chair, a smirk playing across his face. Michael's firing had been a success. To Robert, it was not just about removing an employee. It was about removing a silent threat. Deep inside, Robert always had a strange feeling that Michael was different from the others. He seemed too calm, too wise, too steady for a simple worker. Robert never understood why, but he hated it. The truth was clear in Robert's own mind: he was the one who had stolen money from the company accounts. He had covered it by creating false reports and shifting blame. But to secure himself completely, he needed someone weak to take the fall. Michael, the quiet man who never defended himself too strongly, seemed like the perfect choice. So Robert planted the black envelope in Michael's desk. When the discovery was made, he used his authority and loud voice to frame the story. Most employees believed him because Robert spoke with confidence, and Michael stayed silent. But not everyone was convinced. In the days after Michael's dismissal, whispers filled the office halls. Emma, who had once admired Michael's leadership in the early days, found it hard to believe he would ever steal. She remembered the times when Michael had paid for team lunches out of his own pocket, even when money was tight. Why would a man like that steal now, she wondered quietly to herself. Olivia, on the other hand, tried to bury her doubts. She respected Robert's authority, but something about the way Michael had walked out of the building still haunted her. His words: "The truth hides longer than lies, but it never disappears," echoed in her ears. Robert ignored these doubts. He felt untouchable. With Michael gone, he thought the path was clear for him to rise higher in power. He had plans to control more of Hamilton Enterprises, to bend it to his cold vision of profit above all else. Meanwhile, Michael stayed quiet outside the company walls. Each evening, he walked through the same city streets, blending in with the crowd, carrying nothing that showed his true power. To anyone watching, he looked like a man who had lost everything. But deep within, he carried a secret strength. Michael's silence was not weakness, it was patience. He knew Robert's actions were not just betrayal against him but against the company itself. Hamilton Enterprises had been built with trust and sacrifice, and Robert was poisoning it with lies. Michael watched from a distance, letting events unfold. He knew the day would come when truth would push through the cracks of deceit. One afternoon, James visited Michael. They sat in a small cafe, far away from the tall office towers. James leaned forward, concern written all over his face. "Michael," he whispered, "why did you let them do this to you? You could have defended yourself. You could have ended Robert's lies right there." Michael stirred his coffee slowly, his eyes calm. "Sometimes, James, it is better to let the storm grow before you calm it. People would not have listened to me that day. They were too blinded by Robert's voice. But the truth will come out, and when it does, it will be stronger than any defense I could have given." James sighed. He knew Michael's way of thinking. He respected it, but he also feared the damage Robert could cause in the meantime. Back at the company, Robert grew bolder. He started cutting budgets, pushing employees harder, and speaking in ways that made many uncomfortable. Some staff obeyed out of fear, but others started to remember Michael. They compared Robert's harsh style with the quiet kindness Michael had shown. Emma, unable to stay silent, whispered to Olivia one evening as they left the building. "Doesn't it feel wrong?" Michael didn't even argue for himself. If he was guilty, wouldn't he have fought back? Olivia hesitated but nodded slowly. "Yes, something doesn't add up." That was the beginning of small cracks forming in Robert's carefully built wall of lies. Employees started questioning, just a little at first. But Robert, blinded by his own pride, didn't notice. For Michael, this betrayal was painful, but not surprising. He had always known that power could change people. What cut deepest was not Robert's trick but the silence of those he once trusted. Watching Emma and Olivia doubt him hurt, though he understood why they did. He had chosen silence, and silence often looks like guilt. As he walked home that night, Michael thought about the journey of his life, the sacrifices he had made, the dream he had built. He remembered his mother's words at the kitchen table, "One day, you'll make something great. Just never lose your kindness." He smiled faintly. Betrayal could not take away kindness. Lies could not erase truth. And though Robert believed he had won, Michael knew the story was far from over. Robert had betrayed him. But in time, Robert would betray himself. The days after Michael's firing stretched into weeks, and silence became his closest companion. Each morning, he still woke at the same time, made his coffee, and dressed neatly, as if heading to work. But instead of going to the tall glass building of Hamilton Enterprises, he wandered the city streets or sat in quiet cafes, reading newspapers that carried no mention of his story. On the surface, Michael looked calm, almost peaceful. Yet inside, his heart was heavy. The sting of betrayal did not come only from Robert's actions. What hurt more was the silence of the people he had once trusted, people who had once believed in him, laughed with him, and even called him a friend. Emma had not called. Olivia had not written. James was the only one who stayed in touch, but even he felt powerless against the storm growing inside the company. Michael understood why they stayed quiet. Fear could silence the strongest voices. Still, the loneliness was hard to carry. One evening, Michael sat on a park bench as the city lights began to glow. Children laughed in the distance, chasing each other across the grass, while parents watched with gentle smiles. The scene reminded him of simpler times, days when his only dream had been to create a place where people could work with honesty and dignity. He whispered to himself, "Where did it all go wrong?" The silence that followed was not empty. It was filled with memories of late nights in the small office, of Emma's laughter when the first client signed a contract, of James staying awake with him to balance the books, of Olivia's careful planning that once saved them from failure. Those people had stood beside him when Hamilton Enterprises was just a dream. Now, when his name was dragged through mud, they stood far away. At Hamilton Enterprises, the atmosphere had changed. Robert, now louder and bolder, walked through the halls like he owned the building. His orders grew stricter, his tone harsher. Employees obeyed, but their hearts grew restless. They remembered Michael's quiet ways, his habit of asking how their families were, his belief that even the smallest role had value. Under Robert, that warmth was gone. Emma felt it the most. She would often pause at her desk, remembering how Michael once encouraged her when she doubted herself. "You have more talent than you know," he had told her years ago. Now, she felt guilty for not defending him. But fear tied her tongue. She worried that speaking out would cost her career. Olivia, too, carried doubts. Late at night, she replayed the moment in the conference room when Michael had looked at her, his eyes calm yet filled with quiet pain. She had lowered her gaze that day, choosing silence. Now, she wondered if she had betrayed not only Michael but also the company's true spirit. Michael, meanwhile, carried on with patience. He spent his afternoons in the library, studying reports and documents he quietly received through James. Though he was no longer present in the office, his mind never left Hamilton Enterprises. He knew every detail of its operations, every change Robert made, every budget cut that hurt the workers. Sometimes, he walked past the building, standing across the street to watch employees leaving for the day. From a distance, he saw Emma, Olivia, and many others. They never noticed him in the crowd. Watching them reminded him why he had built the company, not for men like Robert, but for ordinary people who deserved fairness. At night, when the city grew quiet, Michael often sat by his window, staring at the skyline. The silence pressed on him, but he did not allow it to break him. Instead, he turned it into strength. Silence can be heavy, he thought, but it also gives room for truth to grow. One weekend, James visited again. He found Michael sitting at his desk, papers spread around like puzzle pieces. "You're still following everything," James said softly. Michael smiled faintly. "I never left, James. I may not sit in that office, but Hamilton is still mine in every way that matters." James leaned forward, lowering his voice. "People are starting to question Robert. They don't say it out loud, but I can see it. They miss you, Michael. They miss your way of leading." Michael's eyes grew distant. "Then let them find their voice. The truth cannot be forced, it must rise on its own. Until then, I will wait." James studied him for a long moment. "You're carrying a heavy burden alone." Michael shook his head gently. "Not alone. My burden is shared with every honest heart in that company. They just don't know it yet. As James left that evening, Michael sat back in his chair, the weight of silence still surrounding him. But this time, it did not feel like defeat. It felt like a seed buried deep in the soil, waiting for the right moment to break through. The silence was painful. It hurt to be misunderstood, to be left alone, to be doubted by friends. Yet Michael believed that silence would not last forever. One day, voices would rise. One day, the truth would be louder than the lies. And when that day came, Robert's false power would crumble. Though Michael walked the streets like a man without work, his true power was never lost. Hidden behind legal documents and quiet agreements, Hamilton Enterprises still belonged to him. He had built it with his own hands, and no matter what Robert or anyone else believed, the foundation was his. Few people knew this truth. James was one of them. The other was an older lawyer named Henry, who had guided Michael years ago when he first decided to hide his ownership. Together, they had created a structure where Michael's name never appeared on daily reports, yet his control remained strong through silent shares and private contracts. So, while the world thought Michael was powerless, he sat quietly in his small apartment, reading financial statements that James delivered every week. Every number, every decision, every budget cut made by Robert was known to him. It was like watching a storm approach. Michael studied the reports late into the night. He saw how Robert pushed for risky investments and cut down employee benefits. He saw how departments that once thrived under teamwork were now breaking apart under fear. And with every page he read, his heart ached. Hamilton Enterprises was losing the spirit it had been built on. But instead of rushing back, Michael stayed patient. He believed timing was everything. The truth needed to reveal itself at the right moment, when lies were too heavy to hold. One afternoon, Michael met Henry in a quiet corner of the city library. They sat at a wooden table covered in files. Henry adjusted his glasses and leaned closer. "You know, Michael," Henry said, "you could end this today. One announcement, one signature, and everyone will know you're the true owner." Michael nodded slowly. "Yes, I could. But if I reveal it too soon, they will see only revenge. They will think I'm fighting for myself. I want them to see the truth that I never betrayed them, and that Robert's greed is the real danger." Henry gave a small smile. "Patience has always been your strength." Meanwhile, inside Hamilton Enterprises, Robert felt more confident than ever. He had convinced most of the board that his strict methods were best for profit. He walked the halls with a proud stride, giving orders without care for how people felt. Employees followed, but their eyes told another story, eyes that carried fear, confusion, and growing doubt. Emma noticed it every day. She saw how her colleagues whispered during lunch, comparing how things used to be under Michael. She remembered his quiet encouragement, his way of making people feel seen. Robert, on the other hand, treated them like tools. Olivia, too, began to question more openly. She stayed late at her desk one evening, staring at reports that didn't make sense. Some numbers seemed forced, almost as if someone was hiding mistakes. The thought unsettled her. She thought of Michael and his calm defense: the truth hides longer than lies. But it never disappears. Slowly, the memory of those words became heavier in her heart. Michael, from a distance, saw these changes too. James told him about the doubts spreading quietly among staff. "They're starting to wonder if Robert framed you," James said one night as they shared dinner. Michael listened carefully. His eyes softened. "That is good. Let their hearts remember before their minds accept." When people start to question, truth is already near. Though his silence was hard, Michael used it wisely. He prepared. He gathered every record, every hidden detail of Robert's schemes, keeping them safe. He was not rushing into battle, he was building a case, one that no lie could stand against. At the same time, Michael never forgot the workers. He asked James to quietly support those who were struggling under Robert's pressure. When an employee faced unfair cuts, Michael found a way to help without being seen. To them, the support felt like luck, but in truth, it was the hidden hand of their true owner. The days turned into weeks, and though Robert's voice grew louder, so did the quiet resistance of doubt. Emma began to speak with Olivia during breaks, sharing her unease. Others joined in whispers. Though no one dared confront Robert, the cracks in his control widened slowly. Michael watched it all like a gardener watching seeds grow. From the outside, he looked like a man forgotten. But behind the curtain, he still held the strings that mattered most. One evening, as he stood at his window, the city lights glowing in the distance, Michael spoke softly to himself. They think I am gone. They think they fired me. But they do not know I am still here. And when the moment comes, I will not need to raise my voice. The truth will speak louder than I ever could. The silence of his room felt different that night. It was no longer the silence of pain, but the silence of strength, like the calm before dawn. Robert believed he had won. The employees believed Michael was gone. But in reality, the true owner of Hamilton Enterprises was waiting patiently, holding a secret power that would change everything. The cracks in Robert's empire began quietly. At first, they were small, barely noticed. A few numbers on a financial report did not add up. A vendor complained about late payments. A client cancelled a contract without explanation. To most people, these seemed like normal business troubles. But to those who watched closely, the problems pointed towards something deeper. Olivia was the first to notice the strange patterns. She had always been careful with records, and late one evening, she sat in her office comparing reports. The numbers did not make sense. Some expenses were repeated, while others vanished completely. Her brow furrowed as she flipped through the files. "This isn't just a mistake," she whispered. "Someone is covering something." Emma, too, felt the weight of doubt. She remembered Michael's gentle smile and how he once stayed late to help her finish a difficult project. The thought of him stealing money felt impossible. Every time Robert bragged about profits in meetings, Emma's heart grew restless. She could see fear in her co-workers' eyes, but also an unspoken hope that maybe Michael had been innocent all along. One afternoon, Emma and Olivia found themselves alone in the break room. The hum of the vending machine filled the silence between them. Finally, Emma spoke. "Do you ever wonder if Michael was telling the truth?" Olivia looked down at her cup of coffee. "I do. More and more each day. Something about Robert's numbers doesn't add up." The two women exchanged a long glance. Neither wanted to speak too loudly, but both knew the same thing: the story they had been told no longer felt solid. Meanwhile, Robert's confidence only grew. He stood in front of the board of directors with polished speeches and bold promises. He showed them charts of rising profits and graphs of future success. Most nodded and clapped, but a few began to frown. The numbers were too perfect, the growth too fast. Experienced eyes could see through the shine. Michael, watching from afar through the reports James delivered, knew the moment was coming. "The lies are getting heavier," he told James one evening. "And heavy lies always fall on their own." Still, Michael did not rush. He wanted the truth to reveal itself, not to be forced. He trusted that time would do what anger could not. Soon, the first real break appeared. A client who had been loyal for years asked to meet privately with the board. In that meeting, the client revealed that Robert had pressured them into unfair terms. "This is not the company I once trusted," the client said firmly. "When Michael was around, things were different. Honest. Fair. Now, it feels like I'm dealing with a stranger." The board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. For the first time, Robert's charm did not cover the unease in the room. Back in the office, whispers grew louder. Employees compared their paychecks, noticing unfair cuts. They remembered how Michael never allowed such things. His dismissal began to feel less like justice and more like a trap. Emma gathered courage one evening and visited James. She knocked softly on his door, her face pale but determined. "James," she said, "I need to know the truth. Did Michael really steal?" James hesitated. He had promised Michael to stay quiet, but he also saw the pain in Emma's eyes. After a long silence, he answered carefully, "Michael is not the man they say he is. That's all I can tell you now." Emma felt her heart lighten. For the first time, she had a clear sign that her doubts were right. She left with a quiet promise in her heart to stand for the truth when the time came. Olivia, too, began collecting evidence. She saved copies of reports, highlighting the strange numbers. Each document became a small piece of a bigger puzzle. Though fear still followed her, she felt strength growing inside. Robert remained blind to all of this. He walked proudly through the office, believing everyone still feared him. But the truth was unfolding in silence. Eyes were opening, voices were preparing, and his power was not as strong as he believed. Michael, sitting in his quiet apartment, looked out at the night sky. He felt the shift in the air. The silence of doubt had turned into the whisper of truth. Soon, whispers would turn into voices, and voices would turn into proof. He closed his eyes and breathed deeply. The time was near. Robert thought his lies had buried Michael forever. But in reality, those lies had built the very stage where Michael's truth would shine. The story was not ending, it was only beginning to unfold. The morning sunlight spilled through the windows of Hamilton Enterprises, but the building felt different that day. A quiet tension filled the air, a mixture of confusion and anticipation. Employees whispered in hushed tones, sharing their growing doubts. Something was about to change, though no one knew exactly what. Michael, however, had long known. Sitting in his apartment, reviewing the final pieces of evidence James had collected, he felt calm. The storm had come, and now it was time for the truth to rise. He arrived at the office that morning with a simple briefcase. He wore his usual calm expression, but his eyes held a spark, a mix of resolve and quiet triumph. Security and staff barely recognized him. For months, they had believed he was gone, a man fired and forgotten. He entered the boardroom directly, where Robert was already boasting, speaking to the board of directors about his supposed achievements. "Our profits are growing. My strategy is working," Robert said confidently, unaware that the room was about to shift beneath his feet. Michael cleared his throat. The room froze. Heads turned. Eyes widened. Robert's confident smile faltered. "Michael? What are you doing here?" Michael took a calm step forward. "I am here to remind everyone of a simple fact, Robert. Hamilton Enterprises was built with honesty, hard work, and dedication. and it still belongs to me. Robert's face turned red with anger. You have no right. You were fired. Michael smiled faintly. On paper, perhaps. But the truth cannot be erased by words on a page. I never left this company. I have always been its owner. And today, I intend to show everyone exactly why I was removed and why the person responsible for lies, deceit, and theft has been celebrated for far too long. The room grew silent. Employees leaned forward, sensing the gravity of the moment. Emma and Olivia exchanged glances, their hearts beating faster. They had believed Michael was innocent, and now it seemed that belief was about to be confirmed. Michael opened his briefcase and placed a series of folders on the table. These contain all the evidence of misconduct, mismanagement, and fraud that has taken place while I was away from this office, he said. Including the false accusation made against me. Robert tried to interrupt. You can't. Michael raised a hand. Please, let the truth speak. One by one, documents, emails, and financial records were displayed on the boardroom screen. The room fell into stunned silence as employees saw proof of Robert's manipulation, the theft of company funds, and the intentional framing of Michael. Even the board of directors could not look away. Emma felt tears well in her eyes. Olivia gripped the edge of the table, overwhelmed with relief and admiration. Months of doubt, fear, and whispers had finally turned into undeniable proof. Michael continued, his voice steady. Robert thought he could remove me because he did not see the ownership hidden behind legal structures. He believed power came from fear. But real power comes from truth, trust, and responsibility. Today, the truth wins. Robert stammered, trying to speak, but his lies had no room to grow. The board, the employees, and the witnesses saw clearly for the first time. The facade of control that Robert had built crumbled in minutes. Michael then addressed the staff. I did not reveal myself earlier because I wanted to see the heart of this company, to understand who truly valued it, and who valued lies over honesty. Hamilton Enterprises was built for you, and it always will be. I am proud of the people who stayed true to the spirit of this company, even when I was accused falsely. Emma stepped forward, her voice strong but trembling. Michael, we believed in you all along. We're so sorry we doubted you. Michael smiled warmly. Do not apologize. Your silence was natural. Lies can make the brightest minds hesitate. What matters now is what we do together. Robert was escorted out of the room by security. His attempts to argue fell on deaf ears. He had lost not only his position but also the respect of everyone who had once followed him. As the tension lifted, Michael walked around the office, greeting employees quietly. He shook hands with James, embraced Emma, and nodded at Olivia. For the first time in months, laughter returned to the hallways. Not forced, but genuine, a reflection of truth and justice restored. That evening, Michael sat in his office, overlooking the city. The day had been long, but a calm satisfaction filled him. Hamilton Enterprises was safe, and justice had been served. He had been humiliated, betrayed, and doubted, but he had endured, and the truth had finally shined. He thought about the journey that had brought him here, from the small kitchen table of his childhood to the crowded office where his vision first grew, to the pain of being falsely accused. Every moment had mattered, every challenge had strengthened him. In the quiet of the evening, Michael whispered to himself, truth always finds a way. Lies can hide for a time, but they can never win. And with that, he turned his eyes to the future, knowing that Hamilton Enterprises would continue not because of one man's control, but because of the trust, honesty, and courage that he had inspired in every person who worked there. The company had been built on truth, and truth had prevailed.